Hi, everybody. I'm Linn Freedman. I'm a lawyer by training. I'm the head of the privacy and cybersecurity team at Robinson and Cole, which is a big law firm. And I've been presenting these presentations on cybersecurity at the IRS forums for several years. And I'm sorry I can't be with you live today, but we're being safe and healthy. And I hope that you get as much out of this as we intend, because we've worked hard on this presentation so that you can get a lot of really good practical tips for cybersecurity. We are doing an advanced session this year because, as in the past, we've had lots and lots of questions following the presentation. So we're trying to answer all those questions ahead of time. First of all, I'd like to thank the American Coalition for Taxpayer Rights and the Pell Center at Salve Regina University for giving us the opportunity to provide this presentation to you. And as always, I'm available afterward if you want to email me with specific questions. We're here to help you to make sure that that you're thinking about cybersecurity, that you're receiving tips that are practical, and hope to help you through this difficult time, especially during the pandemic, as we are moving from an on-premises workplace to remote. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start. Again, this presentation is the advanced presentation, but we're still going to talk about things that are appropriate as backdrop for cybersecurity. So we'll talk about the security challenges related to COVID-19. And I will say that there has been a shift in cybersecurity and in protection in this time, in this very strange time that we're all in. So I'm going to talk about that shift in cybersecurity and the sophistication of hackers and the bad guys, and how they're taking advantage of the pandemic to really target companies, and in particular companies that have a lot of personal information, such as tax professionals. So we'll talk about that and the new risks that we have this year than we've ever had before. I'll provide some tips for remote working during the pandemic. We'll talk about why you all continue to be a high risk for intrusions and for hacking and cyber incidents. We'll talk about the information that is high risk information that I want you to concentrate on when you're thinking about cybersecurity and protection of that information. We'll talk about how you can map that data, what laws apply to you very briefly, what an enterprise-wide program may look like for you, and we'll provide you some tips on different procedures to have in place that you can adopt and develop for your organization. We'll talk about the specific risks today that we're seeing in cybersecurity, how you can develop an incident response plan, how you can educate your employees, and how very, very important that is right now during the pandemic. Basic cyber hygiene, and then conclusion and questions. We never have enough time, but we're going to try to get through all of that in the next 50 minutes. So why are you all prime targets? You're prime targets because you hold all of the holy grail of personal information and of information and data that is very you can sell it on the dark web for money. It's worth and it's valued very highly. So why are you the targets? Because you have more of that information than many other businesses. You have employees, you have all of your clients, you have taxpayer information. All of that information is high risk because it has all that highly valuable information from a hacker's perspective. So, let's talk about the current situation. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the process of trying to transition from on-premises work to remote work. As a result, IT professionals are having a harder time getting a handle on protection and security of the entire platform because everybody has moved their platform to their home. People are using their own routers, they're using their own Wi-Fi. This is increasing the security risk to organizations. So I want to concentrate. There's lots of other issues involved with remote workforce, but I specifically want to talk about the risks associated with your workforce now that they're working from home. So, here are some of the challenges related to the COVID-19 pandemic. First of all, telework, everybody's using their printers and their routers and their Wi-Fi. Maybe they haven't changed their password to their routers, and all the hackers know what those passwords are and can get into your router without you knowing. Perhaps people haven't changed their passwords to their Wi-Fi, so now everyone in the neighborhood can access the Wi-Fi. These are the kinds of things that from a cybersecurity perspective, from a data security perspective, you need to make sure that your employees are aware of and are following basic cyber hygiene practices on behalf of themselves personally, but also on behalf of your organization. In some instances, when people are working from home, they haven't been patching their systems. There's IoT enabled listening devices such as Alexa and Echo, which now are listening to all of the conversations that tax professionals are having with their clients. Highly confidential information that now is being shared with these manufacturers. We're going to talk about a lot of this in a second. There's an increased use of personal mobile devices, which are always high risk. We'll talk about those risks and how to manage those risks. Unprotected wireless networks, increased phishing attempts, which we're seeing in an exponential way because the hackers know everybody's working from home, so they're targeting people. And also in the pandemic, I'm finding that people are more casual. You're dressing more casual. Maybe you're wearing flip-flops instead of real shoes, or you're only dressing from the waist up. As a result, people, when they're working from home, seem to have a more casual attitude about everything, including cybersecurity. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of misdirected emails, spreadsheets that are being sent that shouldn't have the highly sensitive information on them. As a result, it's super important that you are educating your employees and making sure that they're being, as you know, I say, wicked paranoid and vigilant in this time, because the hackers know we're a little more casual than we ever were before. There's also large scale fraud, spear phishing campaigns. And lastly, I've received a lot of questions around the monitoring of employees if they're coming back to the office as states are opening up. And we'll talk a little bit about what you can and can't do with that information and how to secure it. So first of all, in a remote workforce atmosphere, your IT professionals, whether they're in-house or outsourced, should be thinking about the virtual private network and the risks associated with a VPN. You want to make sure that the VPN can handle the additional the additional platform, the additional applications, making sure that your employees understand not to download apps onto their hard drives or their phones without permission, making sure that that you have patching available and quickly, as well as your employees patching their personal phones, because when those patches come out and the pop-up comes up on your phone and says, download the patch now, they often say it's because there's all these neat new features, when in fact, in many instances, in most instances, it's to patch a known vulnerability. So when those alerts come out, they should be patched on an enterprise-wide as quickly as possible, and your employees should know that they should be patching their personal phones as well as quickly as possible. Many tech companies are making their tools available for a remote workforce, including Microsoft, Google, LogMeIn, Cisco, WebEx, and Zoom. Research the security. If you're using any of these tools, passwords are important when you're setting up scheduling. Be thinking about that and making sure your employees know about that. And the privacy settings should be looked at whenever these tools are being used. In addition, now that everybody's working from home, employees should know who to contact if they have an issue, who to reach out to if they have an IT problem, if they're worried that they misdirected an email, if they're worried about an intrusion, or if they made a mistake. It's very important that they know who to contact and that there's constant reinforcement that they should be contacting IT if they are alerted or feel that something is amiss. Remind employees about confidential data handling protocols. I can't stress enough how important employee education and awareness is in this time. If you are doing phishing, any type of phishing campaigns internally to test your employees, now is the time to do that. But reinforce with your employees how important data security and cybersecurity is at this time, and provide them with tools. You want them to be your team members, your defense mechanism. They want to be part of your defense mechanism. Bring them into the culture, make them feel like they're helping the organization, and give them the appropriate tools to do so. Refresh them on privacy and security measures with incident reporting requirements. Conduct a mock incident response, and the SANS remote work toolkit is available for you, and you should look that up if you want to have access to a toolkit that's very easy and comprehensive to use. Uh, when you're thinking about your remote workforce and educating your employees, one thing that's very important is document printing. The at-home environment is not the best place for paperwork. So think about your employees printing. Make sure that they have a shredder so that this information isn't laying around and available to other people in their households. Remind them about personal and business data, including trade secrets. You don't want your employees printing tax returns or confidential employee information and then having it in their home. You want documents to be accessed through the VPN or with multi-factor authentication. And if confidential data is to be emailed or shared, reiterate to everyone that encryption is so important in this, in the transmission of confidential information, because in all 50 states, there's a safe harbor that if there's an unauthorized access, use, or disclosure of personal information, if it's encrypted, there's a safe harbor around notification. Encryption technology is very, very important for the transmission of high-risk data. So you know that you're a prime cyber target. You also know that if you become the target of a cyber attack, more than 60% of small businesses have said that they have been the victim of a cyber attack, and an estimated 60% of small businesses will go out of business as a result of a cyber attack. So this is something that's very important to your organization. And again, your employees need to be aware that in a remote setting now, the risk is even higher. So if you are the victim of a cyber attack, there's a high risk that you could go out of business as a result of it. It's hard to find a balance between privacy and cybersecurity. Everybody wants to use their personal phones. We're generating so much more data today than ever before. People are downloading apps without reading the privacy policies or understanding how those apps are are monitoring and collecting very sensitive data, personal data, including business data, by using cameras, microphones, and location-based services, which we'll talk about in a minute. So where do you start in all of this? As I always say, and will continue to say, not all data is treated alike. Some data is higher risk than other data. The data that I want you to be thinking about and really trying to protect in the highest sense is personally identifiable information, and the highest risk data are social security numbers, state issued ID numbers, driver's license numbers, and passport numbers. That information in all 50 states, if there's an unauthorized access user disclosure, that's a reportable data breach. So if you do nothing else after this presentation, start thinking about where those social security numbers are. Unfortunately for tax preparers, they're everywhere. So they're in paper records, they're in digital records. Think about how you can limit the receipt of social security numbers, how you can limit the disclosure of social security numbers, and how you can limit the disclosure and access of that high-risk data by employees. Not all of your employees need to have access to every single one of your clients' tax returns. You be thinking about access controls in that. But so how do you identify and protect it? You can protect the high-risk data once you identify it. This is an important slide. This is basically a slide that you could take and say, where do I have all this information? And start mapping that high-risk data so you know how to protect it. When you map your high-risk data, first you have to find it. If you start with anything, start with social security numbers, driver's license numbers, and passport numbers. If you find that data both digitally, electronically, and in paper, you can then say, where am I keeping it? Well, I'm keeping it in my email. I'm keeping it in paper. What am I doing? Am I redacting it before I'm scanning it? Am I making sure that others in my firm can't see it? When I'm sending it to my clients, back to my clients, am I sending them their social security number back to them? I don't need to do that. They know what that is. Redact it before you send it back. Redact it before you send it to vendors. Redact it before you send it to others. Figure out where it is, where it's located, is it encrypted, and where does it go? This slide is a great tool for you to determine and think about where is that high-risk data. Once you know where it is and you've mapped it, then you can put security measures in place to protect it. I'm not going to go through all of the laws that apply to you, but I want you to be aware that there are laws that apply specifically to tax preparers. There are Internal Revenue Code regulations that apply to you. All 50 states have data breach notification laws that apply to you in the event that you have an unauthorized access user disclosure of personal information. And in particular, there are new state laws that are applicable specifically to tax preparers, one of which is Virginia. And Virginia has a state law that requires tax preparers to notify the state regulators in the event of a data breach. So it's a tricky place. Know that different laws apply to you, and that different state laws may apply to you depending on where you are located. So what can you do to minimize the risk of an attack, monitor for dangers, and manage? First of all, if you don't have an enterprise-wide privacy and security program, be thinking about it and prioritize this for 2020, especially with a remote workforce. You need to have policies, procedures, and standards that you adhere to and your employees adhere to. Start educating your employees. Make this the time that you're really educating your employees about privacy and security, because phishing continues to be a problem, which I'll talk about in a second. And phishing is probably the number one risk that I'm seeing in the industry of how cyber attacks occur. This is where you need to concentrate your resources and your timing on with your employees, They really want to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Ensure compliance with regulatory and legal compliance. Audit and assess your program periodically. Assess your collection, use, and disclosure of data. A security risk assessment will help with that. I talk about that every year. If you haven't completed your security risk assessment yet, now is the time. A security risk assessment will help you identify where the gaps are in your program so that you can prioritize your resources and your time on how to fix the major gaps, and you can get the biggest bang for your buck. That's the whole purpose of a security risk assessment. Examine the processing and storage of data, both electronically and paper records. Many companies and tax preparers are just sending all that paper over to a document storage company. That's not really addressing the risk associated with that paper. If you don't have a document retention program, that's something to put on your list. For 2020, you still have 5 months to go. So you still can make progress here. Implement appropriate security processes regarding the transmission of data and in particular encryption technology, and establish your website privacy policy in terms of use. Especially if you're in California, there's a new law called the California Consumer Privacy Act. It went into effect in January, and the Attorney General has started to enforce that law starting July 1st. If you are located in California, know what that means, but in particular, you need to be thinking about your website privacy policy in terms of use in order to comply with that law. So some of the procedures that are basic to your enterprise-wide privacy and security program include an acceptable use procedure, super important right now for your remote employees in particular, so they're aware of what the guidelines are and what your expectations are around the use of your network and systems. If you haven't provided that to your employees lately, now might be a good time to be thinking about that. Social media standards and guidelines, super important in a remote setting as well. Lots of people are on social media. What are your guidelines around that? What can they say? What can they not say? Be careful that there are, the National Labor Relations Board has come out with some guidance on that. So you be careful around your social media standards and guidelines. Bring your own device program, BYOD, super important right now while everyone is using their personal phones while they're working from home. I'll talk about that in a second. An email procedure could be part of your acceptable use procedure, but you might want to have a separate one. It depends on the size, scope, and complexity of your organization, but it should be something you're thinking about and that your employees are well aware of. A data retention program and retention schedule. Again, just putting it all in storage is not minimizing your risk. When we think about some of the most recent attacks and the access to information that cyber criminals have gotten access to, many of it is decades old because the companies never bothered to either have a data retention program or actually follow it. So you want to get rid of that data that you're not using right now unless you're legally required to keep it, because as long as it's in your possession, it continues to be your risk. Should be thinking about that very seriously. It's a big risk reduction for your organization. HIPAA compliance if you're a self-funded health plan, and then telework security considerations, which we'll talk about. So phishing continues to be the #1 risk associated with cyber attacks. Phishing is a malicious spam-like message that is sent in large batches. If one phishing email is getting through your perimeter, through your firewall, your spam filter, you can pretty much assume that if it got through to one individual, it got through to many. Your employees need to know that if they receive a phishing email and they recognize it, that instead of just deleting it, they should be sending it to the IT professionals to let them know that it got through the spam filter. Because even though they might have recognized that it is a phishing email, many others in the organization are going too fast, they're distracted, they might click on it without looking at it closely. So if everybody is sending these phishing emails to the IT professionals, they can blacklist it, make sure no one else clicks on it. That's another thing in the remote setting. I'm finding there's a lot of distraction. I'm lucky because I don't have little kids that I'm homeschooling or helping with their homework while they're remote learning. In many instances, there are lots of people in your home and you're distracted and you're doing the best you can to work. As a result, I'm finding that successful phishing campaigns are becoming more successful because of a remote workforce that has a lot more distractions. Understand that your workforce is distracted, that your employees are distracted, that they have distractions that they've never had before on a day-to-day basis during the workday. So concentrate on phishing and spear phishing so that they can recognize them, that they're working with your IT professionals to advise the professionals about these phishing emails so they can blacklist them and try to engender a more aware workforce around phishing in this very distracted time. Ransomware continues to be a problem, and there's some very scary ransomware out there, which I'll talk about in a second. The way to combat and prevent ransomware is obviously employee education around phishing, because most of the time it gets in through phishing, sometimes through zero-day vulnerabilities. But also having a robust backup system is very important in mitigation of ransomware attacks. I want to talk briefly about zero-day vulnerabilities. Zero-day vulnerabilities are increasing, and zero-day vulnerabilities are when the cyber criminals are able to exploit a vulnerability that hasn't been patched yet. So, for instance, Microsoft comes out every Tuesday. It's called Patch Tuesday with patches for all of their products. And it comes out every Tuesday, sometimes with dozens and dozens of patches for their products of vulnerabilities that they have found about in recent days, usually days and in the last week. If a hacker finds out about a vulnerability between Tuesday and Tuesday, they're able to sometimes exploit that vulnerability. And this isn't just Microsoft. I'm giving that as an example. All hardware and software companies out there uh, find out about vulnerabilities through security researches, and then they figure out a patch and they send the patch out. This is very, very important for you, because when you're getting that patch from the manufacturer, you need to patch as soon as possible, because we're seeing an increase in zero-day vulnerabilities where they're getting into networks and systems before the patch is patched, sometimes before the manufacturer even knows about it. So I cannot stress patching enough for both you and your IT professionals, but also your employees. We know about ransomware. Ransomware gets in usually through the clicking of a phishing email, clicking on an attachment or a link embedded in the email. What's very scary about phishing right now is there are companies out there that you can buy a URL that has one letter transposed, or is mimicking a company URL and email address. Your employees need to be aware of this. You need to be aware of this so that you are very vigilant in looking at the URLs, understanding that they're being spoofed down to the letter, and to be wicked paranoid if there's any suspicion that email should be shared with IT. But what happens is someone clicks on that link, clicks on the attachment, and ransomware is introduced into the system. Usually a ransom note will pop up and say, your entire system is encrypted. You don't have access to it unless you pay us such and such amount in Bitcoin. And unless you have a robust backup system, you basically have no access to your data. So think about not having access to your emails, your taxpayer information, your client information. You're stuck. So backups are very important in this to avoid ransomware infections. Being very careful about clicking attachments or embedded links in emails, and making sure that all of your employees understand that this is a very high risk and are being super vigilant around phishing. So Maze is the ransomware I want to talk to you about. It's awful, and I don't like these guys at all. They're just awful. It has popped up actually since last fall, in the fall of 2019. But the FBI came out and warned companies of Maze. But basically, this is what Maze is doing. Maze is figuring out, sometimes through phishing campaigns, sometimes through zero-day vulnerabilities. They get into your system. Sometimes they're not setting off their ransomware note right away. They're gathering all your high-risk data. They're exfiltrating it. They're keeping it, and then they drop the ransomware note when it's when they have enough of your most sensitive data that they have leverage over you. And they send the note and they say, we want this much in Bitcoin. And when you say, that's okay, we have a really robust backup system, we're not going to pay you, like is my favorite thing to say to ransomware guys. They then go, oh, well, that's all well and good, but we have all your data. And if you don't pay us for a certificate of destruction, we're going to post all of your data on the internet, and we're going to let people just use it and buy it freely. So then you ask them for proof of life, which means you ask them for proof that they have your data, and they show you the proof of life. And then basically you're confronted with the decision, do I pay a criminal for a certificate of destruction? It's a little bit of an oxymoron. Or do I allow all my data to be, or my employee data, my taxpayer data, my customer data to be published on the internet? They have hit many organizations in all industries. They have, when companies have not paid the ransom for the certificate of destruction, they have published the data. One day you'll hear that the data was on the dark web, and then the next day it's gone because they paid the ransom. Understand that this is out here. This is there's not a lot you can do about completely preventing Maze, but what you can do is educate your employees, because it comes in through phishing, and make sure you're patching as quickly as possible, and understand that cyber liability insurance is very important in this context. Another new ransomware is Revo ransomware, and it basically does the same thing and says that they're going to publish files and threatening to release information unless the ransom demand is met. They released files from a New York law firm regarding celebrity clients unless they paid a $42 million ransom demand. And they launched an eBay-like auction site. So if you don't pay, they auction off your data, and the highest bidder gets it. Not a great position to be in if you're a company, obviously. I told you about zero-day vulnerabilities. So here are some telework recommendations for you from NIST, the National Institutes for Standards and Technology. NIST has a lot of great resources for you. They're free. Go on the NIST website and avail yourselves of these free resources. But basically, you need to make sure that you have tiered levels of remote access. Multi-factor authentication is very, very important for any enterprise access, especially if you're using Office 365. Encryption technology, so employees are using encryption when they are transmitting data outside of your network. Make sure that remote access servers are secured and kept patched. I cannot emphasize patching enough, and multi-factor authentication in this remote work setting. And then making sure that desktop and laptop computers are secured as best you can, and that your employees know about how to secure their private and their at-home computers and work. So here's NIST. Here's a great resource for you. Here's the link for you. Take a look at that for more information. One of the things that I really want to talk about today is the fact that a lot of your remote workforce has IoT devices. Maybe you do too. What I like to say is, we're all working in different places. I'm lucky because I have an office. I don't have kids at home. I have I'm very grateful and blessed that I'm able to be as least distracted as possible. Everyone is struggling with distraction. And a lot of times people aren't looking around them to see what IoT devices do I have and what could be listening. You've got Alexa and Echo. If you have one in your home office, sometimes you're working in the attic, sometimes you're working in the basement, in a bedroom, in the kitchen, wherever you're working. If you have a listening device that's on, that listening device is listening to everything you're saying. It's collecting the data, sending it back to the manufacturer, and they're mining that data. They're allowed to because you gave them permission to when you accepted the terms of service. So, if wherever your workspace is, be thinking about what IoT devices are on and could have a microphone. And I want to talk a little bit about that because that's a high risk situation right now. If you have these type of personal devices, be thinking about it, identify them, and turn them off. Putting them on mute is not enough. They're still collecting the information. They're just not talking back to you. So put them on mute, take them out of the room, be thinking about the confidentiality of the information of your employer or of your taxpayers and your clients, because that, from my perspective, is a violation of confidentiality. So unplug it, turn microphones and cameras off completely during the workday, and manage and delete recordings using the Alexa app. Be aware of what IoT devices you have that are listening to you, and be aware that they could be a violation of confidentiality. I'm going to talk just briefly about bring your own device programs, especially now that we have a remote workforce. If you don't have a bring your own device program, you should be considering it. A bring your own device program allows the use of your employees' personal devices while they're working remotely. Many companies have them in place. I'm finding that smaller companies sometimes don't and are allowing their employees to use their devices for their email program. You want to have a program in place that your employees are agreeing to follow guidelines around how they can use their personal phone for business purposes. If you have a mobile management software, that is recommended in a bring your own device program so that the email of your company can be sandboxed from the rest of the information on the person's personal phone. Therefore, if their phone is lost or stolen, you can remote wipe it and you're not remote wiping the entire phone. Employees don't like that when you do that. Trust me on this. So make sure that you are looking into a mobile management software program so that you can manage the email that's on your employees' phones. In participation with the Bring Your Own Device program, I like when employees are signing off on guidelines. They know that if their device is lost or stolen, they have to tell the company so that you can remote wipe your email, your company email off that device. Reserve the right to terminate their authorization if they're violating the BYOD program. Provide employees with information around how they can access your program and the procedures around your program, and establish that they have to use a complex password in order to access your email from their personal phone. So I'm going to talk briefly about, because I get a lot of questions around this right now, about collecting health data from your employees now that we're transitioning back and we're opening up a little bit more, transitioning back to the office. So when you are collecting health information from your employees as they're transitioning back to their office, that information usually does not fall under HIPAA, even though it may be health information. You might be asking them to fill out a health questionnaire. What was your temperature today? Maybe you're taking their temperature as they're walking through the door. All of this is allowed to be, you are allowed as an employer to collect and access that data in order to provide a safe workplace for your employees. So you're allowed to do that, and you're allowed to ask your employees to use a contact tracing app. Other other laws may apply, but HIPAA usually does not apply here. Other laws may apply, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Family Medical Leave Act. So be aware that laws may apply to the collection of this health information from your employees as you're transitioning back to a safe workplace, but HIPAA usually does not. But what I say about that is when you're collecting data from your employees, I would suggest that you consider being very transparent about it. When you're collecting the data, only collect the data that you absolutely need in order to have a safe workplace for your employees. When you're collecting this highly sensitive data from your employees, you only want to collect it and maintain it for a certain amount of time, only the amount of time that you actually really need it in order to provide a safe workplace. So you don't want this information to be just sent to a data warehouse so that it's there for 20 years. This is data that should be collected for around 14 days, maybe 21. But you don't want to have this hanging around. You don't want this data hanging around. Be thinking about how you're collecting it, the minimum amount you need, and how long you're retaining it. And be transparent with your employees about why you're doing it and how long you're keeping it. The FBI is urging vigilance during COVID. On April 13th, they warned of the rise of scams involving COVID-19 pandemic, including blackmail attempts, COVID-19 themed phishing messages, work from home scams, and paying for non-existent treatment or equipment and investment scams. The Federal Trade Commission, ftc.gov, is also a great resource for you. The FBI and the FTC, both of their websites are great resources for you in understanding what the increase of risks are during COVID-19. And the FTC has a scam alert that I get that is quite good. Avail yourselves of that during this time. So how do you unfortunately, you really need to have an incident response plan in place because incidents are increasing. They're not going away, especially during the pandemic. If you don't have an incident response plan in place, that should also be on your checklist of moving forward. To be effective, you need to be able to have an incident response team. Figure out who needs to be on that team. You want it to be a mean, lean fighting machine so that they get a lot done. They can move quickly and efficiently. And understand that if you don't have an incident response plan in place, there are 50 state laws that apply that should be part of your incident response plan and response. So it's important that you have a plan, that you understand how your communications will be managed. Your cyber liability insurance is to be notified, and that you have appropriate vendors in place. An incident response team usually would include a legal counsel is very important part of your incident response team, your IT professional, your privacy professional, communications, someone from management, and your CFO, your chief financial officer, or someone from finance should be part of that incident response team. I know I'm a broken record here, but educating your employees, I find that it's very hard during a remote situation to educate your employees, but any tools, any education you can provide to them, they really appreciate it because they're distracted, they're doing the best they can. We're all in a different scenario than we've ever been before, and all they want to do is do the right thing. Give them those tools and make them part of your defense. They really want to be part of your team. So, how do you better protect your data under your enterprise-wide privacy and security plan? Here's some cyber tips and tools that I've said before, but I want to reiterate. 1, encrypt your laptops. 2, Don't use USB drives. Just don't use them. They're just the worst. They're easy to lose. They're easy to steal. They have malware and ransomware in them. Be very careful about portable hard drives. When people are using smartphones, make sure that they're not downloading apps with microphones, cameras, and geolocation. And if they are, they're turning off those services when they are not using them. Don't allow anyone remote access to your device, even if they're saying they're calling from IT. We're getting a lot of incidents where uh, phone calls and emails are coming from IT. They're not. So let everybody know your IT department is not going to be calling you asking you to change your password. Um, Again, USB drives, just stay away from them. When you're talking about mobile devices, again, complex passwords are important. Installing and enabling encryption, including patching, is very important. Remote wiping activities through your BYOD program is very important for managing risk, and enabling and installing a firewall. I put this slide in because I always want people to understand that after this program, I want you to go into your settings of your phone and look at all the apps that you've given permission to for the camera, the microphone, any type of movement, geolocation. Why are you providing access to your camera so that they can see you at all times? Why are you providing access to your microphone so they can hear everything you're saying? If you are allowing such access to certain apps, turn them off when you're not using them, and make sure that you are only using them when you are only allowing access when you're using them. Again, this could be a breach of confidentiality. If I'm sitting here with my phone next to me and I was having a private conversation with you about your tax returns, and I've got 5 apps that have access to my microphone, they now have access to all that private information. So be super careful about what you're allowing access to your data on your smartphone. I can't also emphasize enough how important paper records are and the destruction of paper records, shredding. Everyone should have a shredder at home during this remote workforce situation. Remind your employees not to use Gmail for company information. Not only Gmail, I'm not picking on Google now. Any private email platform, when you sign up for a private email platform, you are allowing them access to all the content in your emails. So understand that if people are using Gmail or other private email accounts, all of that data, including taxpayer information, is being shared with those manufacturers. Use an enterprise email system where there are confidentiality protections in place. When using email, use encryption technology, multi-factor authentication, a VPN, and make sure that you're using the standard confidentiality disclaimers at the bottom of your email signature. Paper records, we've talked about, they should be in locked filing cabinets in a locked facility. If they're at home, you should have a locked filing cabinet with all that taxpayer information, not allowing other people to access that information, and shredding all that information when you no longer need it. So with that, I'm going to provide you with additional resources. The IRS, it comes out with some great resources and tools for you. They're here to protect you. They're here to help you. They're here to provide you with resources. Please avail yourselves of the IRS website for the resources that they're providing to you. They really want to help you protect the taxpayer information. So all of these, the DHS, CISA, Cybersecurity Information Security Agency, U.S. Secret Service, NIST, the SANS Institute. In addition, I would say U.S. CERT, FBI, are all great resources for you. And again, I want to just really thank the American Coalition for Taxpayer Rights and the Pell Center for International Relations and Public Policy for allowing, for supporting this program, for allowing me to give this presentation, to provide you all with these resources. And everybody, please stay safe and stay healthy and stay vigilant and be wicked paranoid. And I also want to send out a shout out to Francesca Spedalieri, who is the Senior Fellow for Cyber Leadership at the Pell Center, and Jim Lutz, because they've worked super hard on this presentation. And I'm very grateful to them and to the Pell Center for being such great partners in these presentations. So with that, thank you all. Stay safe, stay well.